I observe, 5 years after the completion of Brexit, a historical irony of unprecedented magnitude. The United Kingdom, which in 2016 was derided as an isolationist power, now proves to be the European nation with the most far-sighted strategic planning of the 21st century. While the European Union descends into a spiral of economic stagnation, political paralysis and societal fragmentation, Great Britain is stabilizing as a sovereign middle power with restored agency. What was then denounced as self-destructive folly now reveals itself as a timely escape from a sinking ship. This development exposes the fundamental miscalculation of Brexit critics who equated economic integration automatically with political success. Reality demonstrates the opposite. While EU member states are trapped in bureaucratic paralysis, London can once again shape independent policy. Brexit was not the beginning of British decline, but the start of Europe's repositioning in a multipolar world order. The speed of this rehabilitation surprises even Brexit supporters. Within 5 years, international perceptions of Great Britain shifted from a stranded ex-empire to an agile global player, while the EU is increasingly perceived as a bureaucratic fossil. The success of Brexit is rooted in Britain's early recognition that the European Union had become a structurally dysfunctional system that created problems rather than solving them. London recognised even before the referendum that EU membership had mutated from an instrument of British power projection into a constraint on British agency. This recognition was not ideological but pragmatic. The EU no longer functioned for British interests. Decisive in this was the British analysis of EU enlargement policy, which systematically weakened the Union rather than strengthening it. Each new membership diluted British influence while simultaneously creating new veto opportunities for problematic actors. Great Britain recognised that an EU with 27+ members would be incapable of strategic decision-making, a prognosis that has been fully confirmed. The Brexit campaign of 2016 mobilised these strategic considerations for democratic legitimacy. Take back control was not merely a slogan but a precise analysis of sovereignty losses through EU membership. In parallel, London analysed the demographic and economic trends of continental Europe that forecast long-term stagnation. While EU politicians spoke of demographic change, Whitehall recognised the reality of demographic collapse. An ageing, shrinking and insufficiently innovative Union could not be the future platform for a global middle power. The energy crisis and dependence on Russia confirmed British skeptics' doubts about European strategic capacity. While Germany sold its energy security to Putin via Nord Stream, London maintained energy diversification. Brexit enabled Great Britain to free itself early from Russian coercion. The migration crisis of 2015 confirmed British concerns regarding EU decision-making structures. While Brussels manoeuvred between German moral appeals and Eastern European refusals, the crisis demonstrated the fundamental incapacity of the system to act. London drew the logical conclusion: an institution incapable of resolving existential problems will not seize strategic opportunities either. At the same time, Great Britain recognised the opportunities of a post-European positioning. As an English-speaking nation with historic connections to North America, the Commonwealth and emerging Asian markets, the UK was optimally positioned for a global Britain strategy. EU membership limited these possibilities through common trade policy and regulatory harmonisation. The fintech revolution and the rise of digital economies played a decisive role. London recognised earlier than continental European competitors that future industries require agility rather than regulation. EU bureaucracy was systematically hostile to innovation, whereas British deregulation could attract growth sectors. The United Kingdom now operates as an agile middle power that uses its regained sovereignty for strategic repositioning between the US, Asia, and Europe. London's strategy is based on combining historic advantages, language, legal system, financial expertise with new possibilities of flexible foreign policy. Decisive here is the AUKUS partnership with the United States and Australia, which makes Great Britain a key actor in the Pacific containment of China. This role would have been impossible within the EU, as Brussels prefers strategic ambiguity towards China. Brexit enabled London to position itself clearly within the Western Alliance and to secure American support in return. In parallel, London is developing into Europe's fintech hub, able to create innovative financial services freed from EU regulation. While the EU bureaucratizes innovation through the Digital Services Act and the AI Act, London attracts global talent and capital through deregulation. This strategy works. London's financial sector continues to grow despite Brexit forecasts. The European Union presents itself as a stagnating bureaucracy, paralysed by internal compromises and unable to develop a coherent response to global challenges. Brussels' reaction to Brexit was symptomatic. Instead of addressing structural reforms, the EU focused on punishing Great Britain through complicated withdrawal negotiations. This strategy proved counterproductive. The more Brussels sought to harm London, the clearer the dysfunction of EU institutions became. The Northern Ireland Protocol, fisheries disputes and trade barriers documented European pettiness, while strengthening British resolve. At the same time, the EU demonstrates systematic inability to make strategic decisions. While London developed AUKUS within months, Brussels requires years for decisions on tariff preferences. This inertia is structural, not accidental. 27 national vetoes make rapid responses impossible. Germany acts as a reluctant European leader, advancing EU integration but unwilling to bear the costs. Berlin's strategy is based on the illusion that European integration can multiply German power without increasing German responsibility. This calculation does not work. EU leadership requires German sacrifices that Berlin is unwilling to make. France positions itself as a frustrated integrationist seeking European sovereignty, but lacking both the means and the partners to achieve it. Macron's vision of a strategically autonomous EU fails due to German reluctance and Eastern European preference for America. The result is French isolation within a dysfunctional union. In the development since Brexit, I recognise three critical trends that systematically deepen the gap between Great Britain and the EU. First, regulatory divergence leads to the creation of alternative business models. While the EU prevents innovation through over-regulation, London uses deregulation to attract new industries. This divergence reinforces itself. The more successful British deregulation becomes, the stronger EU tendencies towards further regulation in response. AI regulation perfectly illustrates this dynamic. Brussels' AI Act drastically restricts European AI development, while London becomes Europe's AI hub through pragmatic regulation. The same pattern is evident in fintech, biotechnology and digital currencies. Second, geopolitical realignment intensifies the systematic reordering of alliances. Great Britain orients itself towards the Indo-Pacific and strengthens ties with the United States, Australia, Japan and India. The EU remains caught between American and Chinese interests and cannot develop an independent position. AUKUS symbolizes this reorientation. While the EU debates strategic autonomy, London establishes practical security partnerships with global reach. These partnerships create economic and technological synergies unavailable to the EU. Third, economic performance divergence develops into a structural difference between British agility and continental European sclerosis. London's capacity for rapid political decisions attracts investment, while EU bureaucracy repels capital. I project three likely development paths from the current post-Brexit situation. In the first scenario, British success leads to a domino effect disintegration of the EU. Other member states recognise the advantages of British sovereignty and consider their own exits. Italy could regain monetary sovereignty through Ital-exit, Poland judicial autonomy through Pole-exit. The EU would shrink to a German-French core. In the second scenario, EU inertia leads to the peripherization of continental Europe in global politics. While Great Britain, the US and Asian powers shape the New World Order, the EU becomes a regulated market without political relevance. Europe becomes a large Belgium, prosperous but insignificant. In the third scenario, British competitive pressure forces the EU into substantial reforms enabling federal integration. Germany accepts a transfer union. France assumes military leadership. Smaller states lose veto rights. A United States of Europe emerges capable of competing with global Britain. The macroeconomic data already document Britain's post-Brexit recovery. London's financial sector retained its global dominance despite all EU attempts to establish Frankfurt or Paris as alternatives. The City of London continues to process 40% of global foreign exchange trading and 60% of euro-denominated derivatives. At the same time, the British economy successfully diversified away from EU markets. Trade with the Indo-Pacific grew by 35%, while EU trade declined by only 8%. This reorientation demonstrates Britain's capacity for strategic repositioning. British technology policy was particularly successful. Through liberal visa rules and light regulation, London attracted international tech talent, while the EU hindered innovation through bureaucracy. British unicorns systematically outperformed continental European competitors. Migration policy documents similar successes. Control over EU migration enabled London to practice selective immigration that serves economic needs rather than fulfilling political obligations. This flexibility increased public acceptance of immigration. Brexit enabled Great Britain to conduct independent foreign policy again rather than accepting EU compromises. This sovereignty manifests itself in concrete strategic advantages. AUKUS partnership, CPTPP accession, bilateral trade agreements with over 60 countries. Particularly valuable is Britain's position within the special relationship with the US. While the EU maneuvers between America and China, London can adopt clearly pro-American positions and receive privileged treatment in return. This clarity creates trust and cooperation opportunities. Commonwealth connections prove to be a strategic resource in a post-Western world order. While continental European countries lose influence in Africa and Asia, London can reactivate historic ties and transform them into modern partnerships. What I recognize in the post-Brexit development is not merely the success of a bold political decision, but confirmation of fundamental differences between Anglo-Saxon pragmatism and continental European ideology. Great Britain recognized in time that the EU had evolved from an instrument of power projection into an obstacle to strategic agility. The Brexit decision was not an emotional rebellion against Europe, but a rational analysis of changing geopolitical realities. London understood earlier than other European capitals that the future lies in Pacific and Atlantic partnerships. The irony lies in the fact that Brexit could have offered the EU an opportunity for self-renewal. Instead of addressing structural problems, Brussels focused on punishing Britain and thereby squandered a historic opportunity for reform. This reaction confirmed British diagnoses of EU dysfunction. Particularly symptomatic was the EU's reaction to Article 50. Complicated withdrawal negotiations were meant to deter other members but primarily documented bureaucratic pettiness. Instead of interpreting Brexit as a warning signal, Brussels treated it as a reputational problem. The COVID pandemic once again demonstrated the superiority of British decision-making structures. While the EU negotiated vaccine procurement for months, London secured rapid access through bilateral contracts. This agility saved thousands of lives and documented the practical value of national sovereignty. The coming years will show whether other European nations muster British courage. Brexit proved political sovereignty is a prerequisite for economic success. Europe stands before a choice between national sovereignty following the British model or federal integration. The Brexit story is not yet over, but the first chapters show sometimes strategic retreat is the wisest advance. Great Britain did not leave the EU out of weakness but out of strength.